So with that in mind, consider this. So of course we've got the boat here, so leaving behind her still on either side, small circles glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track. Now this image, it's less about things being very beautiful. I mean, you could look at the image of glittering idly, and glittering being that aesthetic, pleasant image of something shining, and the moon there as well, and the image of melted into one track, so things coming together and being hazy and dreamlike. It's not necessarily the nature that's doing that. And you look upon this image and you think of the green, and you think of the beautiful, the craggy ridge in the horizon there. But this isn't what Wordsworth's talking about. He's really talking about that idea of being relaxed, and there being pleasure in the quiet and isolation. And again, it's linked to childhood, not really understanding the bigger picture, the threat that nature is. Just enjoying it, in basking in it, without really making that kind of idealistic comment on the beauty of it. Because if you think about it, he could have done more. He does, when he talks about nature being looming and threatening, he uses powerful imagery there. He doesn't at this point speak about the intricate detail and beauty of nature. That's not what he's after. He's not painting a picture here necessarily, he's making a statement. So have that in mind, that yes, the poem progresses, that things go from small and relaxing to very quickly something more concerning, but it's not as simple as nature being beautiful than nature being a threat. It's about the experience of the child here. Things are relaxed, you can kind of run wild, and then things are in place to stop you doing that, or to certainly make you feel guilty about doing that. So I'm trying to sort of move on here. So we go back to the image of straight iron loosened her chain, and now we think about maybe sexual awakening, and he's with this girl, and I won't go into too intricate detail here, but the idea of physical love between them. And there's lots of images in the poem about nature actually entering the body physically and taking over, and maybe taking over from physical urges that he might have with the girl. But when he has loosened the boat, and when it does talk about it was an act of stealth, so there's a bit of guilt there and troubled pleasure. So he's having a good time doing this, but he's not easy about it. Something is on his mind, and it becomes clear that nature has a role in that. God has a role in that. It says, nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on. So the echoes here, before he sees the mountain, he can hear its presence. And it's metaphorical again here of the voice of judgment. And of course, giving nature a moral voice, personifying nature so that it's making a statement, it's confining him. And then comes the judgment, that moment where the mountain appears and strikes fear into our speaker, who we remember is a child on an experience here, and kind of notable quotes that spring to mind as the poem progresses. No familiar shapes retained, no pleasant images of trees, of sky, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live. Now this comes after he first notices the mountain, and it's the mark that's left on him. And one of the things that Wordsworth was particularly interested in was not necessarily enjoying the poems, but being made to think and feel something. And I think that might explain why there are so many images sensory images here of nature making you feel something, even physical. He wanted to know that minds were being nourished, but he cannot escape the impact that nature has had on him, and it lives on. So no familiar shapes remained. So there was nothing else. This mountain dominated his memories, dominated his waking dreams. There was nothing in there from previously that he could remember. And back to this idea of him not being an idealist, no pleasant images of trees, of sky, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields. So note there, you've got that pleasant imagery, you've got the colour imagery there as well, and the peacefulness of green, but it's no colours of green field. It's absent, but huge and mighty forms that do not live. So huge and mighty certainly conjures kind of religious imagery of God there. And then it continues that do not live like living men, moved slowly through the mind by day and were a trouble to my dreams. So nature has entered his mind, a bit like religion here. So it doesn't live like living men, but it might live spiritually. And just in the same way that he feels nature, he cannot get out of his head. And it says, for many days my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense. It's penetrated into his way of life, his thinking. Nature has a physical effect on him. Even early on, with trembling oars, I turns when he first notices the mountain. It has an effect physically on his body. And this is the section where he sees the mountain, he notes it. And there's repetition here. I mean, Wordsworth is one of his renowned, talented poets. He's in the canon. If people name the great poets of all time, I'm sure he'll be there with most people. So if you think about his repetition, a huge peak, black and huge, why can't Wordsworth find another word for huge? Why not great or colossal? Or has it got something to do with the speaker, and the speaker being a child, and not only a child, but someone who is completely bowled over and overwhelmed by what's going on here, that he can only find huge to say again? He's almost lost for words, as if with voluntary power instinct upreared its head. So there we go again with the personification, given a moral function to nature, a moral value to rocks. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars. Now, you could talk about struck possibly as an onomatopoeia, or possibly as repetition. It wouldn't really matter. What would matter would be the effect. Why is it significant that he is now so violently trying to row somewhere away from this presence? It's all about the effects. Let's not be feature spotting here. So as we get to grips with these poems, let's not be saying this is a metaphor, this is personification. What does it do? That's the most important thing. So when Coleridge sent Wordsworth out with his brief of looking at man, nature and society, he wanted him to have something to say. And when Wordsworth sat down and penned this, he wasn't thinking, right, must use personification, tick, must have equal amount of metaphor, similes. He wrote what he felt first, and he used the tools of a writer to illustrate that. And if it happens to be personification at the time, then so be it. But our job is not to spot the tools that he's used, it's to talk about the effect of them. And that is AO2.